Hey everybody, TacticAngel here, back on the PlayStation to take a look at another premium ship in World of Warships Legends. This time we have the Dutch, or Pan-European, Tier 7 Premium Destroyer Friesland, one of two possible campaign ships for the Element of Choice campaign. For this review, I'll start with some history, move into analysis, run down the stats with you, and then we'll finish off with some gameplay. If you do want to skip around at all, you should find some time codes down in the description. The story of the HNLMS Friesland begins following the events of the Second World War. In 1947, the government of Holland issued specifications for a class of ship intended as primarily an anti-submarine warfare ship, a class of ships that would protect the Dutch coastline as well as its interests overseas. Though following World War II, the Dutch East Indies would eventually become Indonesia, they still controlled Suriname and had considerable overseas trading interests that they wanted to protect from maritime economic disruptions. Even if the German U-boats had been defeated, it wasn't like the submarine was going to vanish from the world's oceans. The class that was built off of these specifications was the Holland-class destroyers. These ships would break from the tradition of naming Dutch fighting ships after admirals, instead taking their name from provinces within Holland. When not referred to as Holland-class destroyers, they are sometimes called A-class submarine hunters. This design was revised only a year later, in 1948, with 8 of this new design being ordered. Due to budget limitations, though, the first of the B-class submarine hunters was not laid down until December 1951. That ship was launched in February 1953 and commissioned into service in 1956. The lead ship of this B-class of hunters was the Friesland, which continued the newfound tradition of naming ships after provinces. Though several hundred tons heavier and with a deeper draft, the Friesland destroyers managed to reach cruising speeds of 36 knots rather than the previous Hollands, which registered just at 32. The version of the Friesland that we have in-game is near about what it was in its original configuration. The B-class hunters would see a refit in 1963 to replace some of its depth charges with torpedoes, which at that point were considered a better anti-submarine weapon. The ships spent much of their time in port due to budget and personnel constraints on the Dutch Royal Navy, and as a Cold War vessel, there was not a lot of major published naval engagements involving any warships, much less Dutch warships, but one of the Frieslands, which was HNLMS Utrecht, was present for the Battle of Arafura Sea, where 3 Indonesia landing motorboats had intended to disembark soldiers on what was then Dutch New Guinea. The landing was turned back with 1 boat sunk by gunfire. 3 Indonesians would lose their lives, though the Dutch were nice enough to pick up everyone else who was in the water. By 1967, the ships were starting to show their age, with multiple ships, and I suspect the Friesland herself, showing signs of fatigue-based cracks in both the hull and the propeller shaft. A year later, the Netherlands withdrew the Frieslands from service. The Friesland herself was sold for scrap in 1979, while HNLMS Holland and all of the remaining Friesland class were sold to Peru. The Peruvian Frieslands would serve another decade into the 1990s, with the last one being decommissioned in 1991. I didn't find anything to say where they were disposed of, so there's probably a few of these still sitting around in mothballs somewhere to this day. As for the Friesland in-game, the worst thing I can say about this is that it is clearly not a World War II destroyer. Maybe the next most challenging thing is that it really isn't a proper destroyer. The Friesland is, on the other hand, a little terror of a light cruiser masquerading as a destroyer. The things that people will like about this ship are its extremely high rate of fire, and even if the fire chance doesn't look that high, considering the 2 turrets on this ship are the closest things that we have to a chain gun, it's something that the sheer volume of fire makes up for. This, plus the fact that the turrets both rotate 360 degrees, gives you advantages in just about any destroyer knife fight that doesn't involve you being focused by a ship with main battery reload booster. Though not exceptionally fast, the ship also handles well with decent rudder shift and a tight turning circle. which puts you right at home in one of those destroyer versus destroyer engagements. It is also worth mentioning that your main battery doubles as part of your AA suite, which also includes several more Bofors, giving you an AA rating that is not only exceptional for a destroyer, but is also the envy of the majority of battleships and cruisers at Tier 7. Oh yeah, and sonar. You have sonar too, so you can do all those filthy tricks to ships that smoke up too close to you, or you can smoke up yourself and do it to them anyway. For these advantages, you end up with just a few identifiable disadvantages. The most obvious one is that you have no torpedoes. For some, this is going to be a straight up deal breaker, because what is the point of a destroyer if not to launch torpedoes? Well, I mean, the obvious answer I would give to you, hypothetical person, is obviously to shoot its guns. But that's not how everyone likes to play their destroyers. And admittedly, this ship takes longer to kill most of its prey, except other destroyers, because you lack all of that spike damage. Just like the Kid, if you get into a late game scenario where you are the last hope and you need to claw back a victory, you are just a destroyer. You have a pretty limited amount of hit points, like all other destroyers, and you need to be able to see most of the things you want to shoot at. And that means they can see you, and that may mean that you take a few extra L's because of it. Though not a wildly obvious disadvantage, there's a good chance that you might smoke up and find yourself blazing away with the main battery here. It's a trick that definitely works, but it is just about the easiest ship in the game to blind fire thanks to the relentless stream of death pointing right back at your ship when you're doing that. And that last one might not be something of a disadvantage as much as it is something that makes one of your advantages slightly worse, but in trying to put together a list of strengths and weaknesses, really, this is going to come down to whether or not you like playing destroyers, and if you could ever envision yourself playing a destroyer that doesn't have torpedoes. When looking at stats, there's really not quite anything like the Friesland, so we'll talk about how this ship fits in with the rest of the Tier 7 destroyers overall. And in terms of survivability, there's no impressive armor anywhere on the ship that is going to do anything interesting for you. We have 13 to 20 millimeters, that works out to 13 on superstructure, 20 everywhere else, and you're pretty much going to take damage. So the most important thing, as always, is your hit points, and with 17,600 hit points, this is pretty much exactly what you would expect from a Tier 7 destroyer, right in the middle of the pack. The Friesland has just 4 guns mounted in true turrets, 1 fore and 1 aft. They both have 360-degree turret rotation and pretty comfortable firing arcs, at least forward of the ship. Unlike some American ships with just 4 guns, you do have a really incredible amount of damage per minute thanks to this 1.8 second reload. That's 40% faster than the Fletcher's reload, which is only 3 seconds. And you only have 1 less gun. This adds up to doing more than 20% more DPM with your HE, and thanks to this 8% fire chance, you're also going to be a good fire starter, even for cruiser. In fact, for comparison purposes, this is pretty close to a stock Chapayev in terms of levels of arson. In any case, you'll have very nearly twice the average of DPM of Tier 7 destroyers while using HE, and you will just barely beat out the Akizuki, which has the best AP performance, on paper anyway. In my experience, this AP is a bit underwhelming in terms of its damage against actual targets, even among targets you would expect to eat tons of damage from 120mm guns. This black screen will remind you briefly that this destroyer has no torpedoes, so make of that what you will. That said, in the anti-aircraft department, the Friesland really is quite powerful. In fact, you would be good for a cruiser at the same tier, except that this doesn't come with access to defensive fire AA. You may remember that one destroyer does have defensive fire AA at this tier, which is the ZF6, and even after it presses the button, these values are better than what the ZF6 can put out. It earns this high 83-point AA rating largely because it has great long-range AA, very good medium-range AA, and actually all of the damage per second that you can put out there picks up by 3.5 kilometers, which is just great. In terms of overall maneuverability, the Friesland is a respectable 36 knot speed. You can hit 40 with the speed boost, and this is actually a bit on the slow side of average. You do make up for it with a pretty normal rudder shift and fairly tight turning circle for a Tier 7 destroyer. Other than the rudder shift, this ship feels pretty maneuverable, somewhere right in between where you would find the Kagero and Fletcher. Overall, the concealment for the Friesland is not exceptional. It's actually about 200 meters further than normal. But because you are going to be using Svirsky as your commander, at least currently, it may not be quite as obvious that this little ship is a bit more noticeable than average. But it is easy enough to get the sea detectability under 5.5 kilometers if you want to, while also having a second inspiration that you can use on just about anything. Hopefully hit points. Coming to consumables, you will end up with the normal sorts of things you would expect to see here. There is the standard damage control, then the default factory speed boost, which increases your speed by 8% for 2 minutes. You have an equally average smoke generator that gives you just 2 charges and lasts 84 seconds with a 3-minute long recharge. That's actually not a bad thing to have here, considering that you get sonar on top of that, meaning that you have basically the same set of tools as the Z23, because this has the same sonar range as the Z23, and it doesn't have German smoke. All in all, a pretty powerful package when all you're really giving up is torpedoes. So, as we jump into some gameplay, we're going to be on Tears of the Desert. So I think this video is probably going to do a pretty decent job of showing off the ship, with the one exception of fending off aircraft. I only got into a couple of games with carriers, and about half of those, the carriers took one run at me and decided he had better things to do with his life. In any case, it's going to take a little bit of time before we get into any sort of action, so it's worth talking about what we have as our commander. I'll go ahead, put him up on the screen. No surprises here, since Jerzy Svirsky is the only commander that you can use right now. And a few notes about the choices here, starting with the AA. Right now, carriers are rare enough that I probably wouldn't bother to build this as an AA ship unless you only intended to take it in while playing in a division with a carrier. It's pretty much the only way that you're going to see them with any consistency, at least right now. If you were going to beef up your AA, I would probably start with the 4th slot AA modification before looking at the 1st slot AA range modification, just because it is generally good to maintain your stealth, and having people follow your AA fire back to you is kind of a great way of getting killed. I think the advantages that you get from the 1st slot commander skill, no fly zone, would probably be my second choice before choosing the 1st slot for extended range, but if you choose either of those, you'll probably end up eating into your reload speed, so maybe don't do either one of those right now. I'd also like to point out I'm using Perceptive here. I think that your turret rotation is good enough. I think in this case, the turret rotation I have is just about as slow as you can possibly make it, and you're going to get more out of damage reduction than increasing your turret rotation, because both turrets rotate 360 degrees. Even if the turret rotation doesn't look great on paper, it actually works pretty well here. And obviously you can see we have kind of chosen to go ahead and use Sims as our second inspiration, just to make sure we have extra hit points. Now I'm going wide here in hopes of not flooding the capture zone with a whole bunch of ships, and kind of hoping that the enemy DD, which is clearly in the cap, will come out to fight. Of course, it looks like their destroyer is way on the inside, and right now I'm just going to help my team set this Georgia on fire. You can already see kind of the incredible rate of fire that you get out of these. This is actually pretty much the first ship that I have ever just gotten into the habit of always just holding down the shoot button. Because really it's annoying to try to spam R2 at this kind of rate. I'm not looking to play a first-person shooter. In any case, with the first Georgia out of the way, we're going to go ahead and turn around. We're going to use our speed boost because we are kind of a bit out of position. We do still have all our hit points, which is a good idea. And that's by and large because we stayed at a range where the Georgia just had better things to do with 18-inch guns than to shoot at me. I am favoring the back half of this cap because I figured that if the enemy destroyer was favoring either side of the cap, it would be the back half of it where all of his friends are. But seeing that giant cloud of smoke means that most likely we wouldn't be able to see him anyway. We're going to go ahead, activate our hydro. Hydro is just amazing. I guess you would call it sonar nowadays. But with 4.4 kilometer detection of boats, this very powerful tool to ferret out folks who are sitting in their own smoke. Based on where that circle is, it's kind of telling me that the Minsk is on the inside. When I turn in, we spot him through the island, because we all know that's exactly how sonar works, is it goes through islands and other solid objects. Actually, wait, no, the functioning principle is that it doesn't, and that it reflects this. It doesn't matter. In any case, we come around the side of the island and just start shooting at this Minsk. Our quick rate of fire makes that a pretty short engagement. The boat is not fine. As you can see, our speed boost has run out, and also our sonar is about to run out. It doesn't last a super long time like you might get with the Royal Navy, but it does have the better range than you'd find on the Royal Navy, so they both kind of have their place. Now you can see with this 10.8 kilometer firing range, I do have range on the Georgia, and I can openly shoot at him even though there's a straight line between me and that other ship that is further away from him, just because my range is not long enough that he will ever be able to see me. Just checking my position there to make sure that I remain unspotted for most of this. And there you can see about the maximum angle that you can preserve while being able to keep both of your guns in the fight. And we just happen to have arrived at a consistent pace of firing that basically is evenly spaced each one of my turrets. So this is just a racket, really. Pew, 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 pew. Anyway, good times. In any case, he's probably hearing something similar, except the impact of those shells when they get there. Looks like we might have found somebody who isn't appreciating just what a good job I'm doing here. So that's kind of a mistake, and I'll go ahead and make another one here real quick. But you can see, obviously, Friesland, if it were to get into a hard carry situation, I had to burn that guy down on my own. It would be very difficult, and if you get hit by too many battleships, even if they are using AP, they're going to do a lot of damage to you, just like that. I probably should have popped smoke as I was coming around this corner. I don't remember specifically if I wanted him to fire first so that he would have 20 seconds of being spotted at the very least. There's another ship that can see him, so I hope that wasn't what I was thinking. I think the other option was that I was just curious how long his secondary battery was. This is not really a good thing to be thinking about at the time. It doesn't serve any purpose, but The Tirpitz has a little bit of a shorter range. He was never within 6 kilometers, so I don't think those torpedoes are going to hit me. But we're going to back up anyway, and as luck would have it, we were correct. They run out. But Tirpitz doesn't end up being quite as dangerous as her sister ship, the lead ship of the class, Bismarck, because Bismarck tends to have secondaries that are every bit as long range as your main battery. So if you had to carry against a Bismarck, it's going to be tricky. It's going to be tricky. Once again, we are hoping to use this island as cover. You can see we're chancing the health and happiness of whoever lives up there on that mountain. And now that the Nagato is far enough forward, we can continue to use that ridge and just lob shell after shell after shell and just chunk this guy like any other light cruiser. And this is super fun and engaging gameplay to be on the opposite end of. I'm sure he's going to go on to Facebook and talk about how much he enjoyed it. So, just glad everybody had a good time. So I'm going to go ahead and ping the map to see if I can't direct some folks out to go try to get that last guy. The game's probably not going to last too terribly long either way. But we will hit that second speed boost, and maybe we'll speed this up just a bit so that we can get out there without wasting too much of everybody's time. But we capture the base, and as we're approaching the smoke screen, we do activate our second hydro. The last ship that is left is a Z-23. Z-23 has functionally the same sonar that I do. So you can see we both kind of spot each other at the same time. In terms of which one of us can put more hurt out there in a hurry, it is going to be me, helped a little bit by the fact that there are 3 other ships on my team still. Wouldn't you know it, sometimes that's useful. In any case, my final thoughts on the Friesland. Well, we were waiting for a long time for a premium tier 7 gunboat destroyer. And you really can't ask for much more of a gunny boat than this particular ship. I think the Friesland is an easy pick for players who enjoy destroyers primarily as anti-destroyer platforms and for map control. But I think it goes without saying, even though I'm about to say it, the lack of torpedoes is going to be a poison pill for a lot of folks. Friesland is going to excel really probably in standard battles more than the competitive scene, and it probably favors above average players who really think about when to shoot, who to shoot, and from what position they want to shoot. If you're a crazy Atlanta or Flint player, the appeal of this ship is somewhat obvious, and though taking up a destroyer slot for the express purposes of sitting in your own smoke and pew-pewing the enemy might be a bit on the selfish side of things, one can hardly imagine that there aren't folks out there who will enjoy the Friesland for doing exactly that. In any case, those are my thoughts on this little ship. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments. Hope you've enjoyed this video, and as always, I hope to see you on the next one.